Kaylyn Leslie Whitaker was born on October 12, 1994, in Terre Haute, Indiana, to David Whitaker and Leslie Roberts. From the start, she was full of promise, a vibrant soul who had everything ahead of her. At just 20 years old, she was engaged to Connor Scott, a man she'd known since high school. The two lived together in the basement of his parents' house in Martinsville, Illinois. But on Halloween night in 2014, that promise was shattered. Connor claimed he woke up to the sound of a gunshot. He said he found Kaylyn lying in bed, dead from a gunshot wound. Authorities first thought it might be self-inflicted, but something didn't sit right. Kaylyn was right-handed. The gunshot wound was on the left side of her head. Forensic pathologist Dr. Roland Coer at first listed the cause of death as undetermined, but after more tests, the truth became undeniable. This was murder. Leslie, Kaylyn's mother, never believed the suicide claim. She knew her daughter. She was a bright, passionate young woman who loved life. The idea that Kaylyn would end it all just didn't make sense. So, with no answers, Leslie and her husband Dave took their fight to the media. They needed answers, and they wouldn't stop until they got them. Meanwhile, Connor, who'd been on and off with Kaylyn since high school, was showing troubling signs. He had a controlling side. Friends noticed it. Family noticed it. Kaylyn, once a woman full of energy and ambition, was now becoming a shadow of herself. She was withdrawing. Connor didn't like her spending time with her friends. And Leslie had raised concerns when Kaylyn decided to move in with him while still attending college. But her daughter was headstrong and had made her choice. Then, shockingly, nearly 2 years after Kaylyn's death, Connor Scott walked into the police station in Danville and confessed. His confession came just weeks after a disturbing incident. Connor had threatened to shoot himself after a breakup with a different girlfriend. Police had seized a loaded gun from him, and now Connor was ready to talk. In his taped confession, he admitted to killing Kaylyn. He said it happened after an argument. In a fit of rage, under the influence of meth, he shot her. He didn't know why. He just did. And after the shot, overwhelmed with emotion, he punched holes in the wall in frustration. For Kaylyn's family, hearing those words, "I killed Kaylyn Whitaker," was both a relief and a heartbreak. It was the truth, but it didn't bring Kaylyn back. Connor was sentenced to 37 years in prison under a plea deal, but no sentence could ever give Kaylyn back the life she was robbed of. Joshua Murray was born on November 8, 1981, in Tuscumbia, Alabama. By the time he was 37, he'd settled in Iberia, Missouri, where he was a loving husband, father, and a well-respected member of his community. He worked as a construction supervisor at Perini Construction and was deeply involved in his church, Curry Community Church. He was the kind of guy who worked hard for his family and the people around him. On June 12, 2003, Josh married Amy Prater, a day that marked the start of what seemed like a bright future together. But, tragically, less than 15 years later, their world would fall apart in the most unexpected way. On December 11, 2018, Josh's life came to a sudden and violent end in a house fire that, at first, seemed like an accident. But as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't just a tragic event, it was a crime. Police discovered that he had already died before the fire even started. An autopsy revealed high levels of antifreeze in his system, a deadly poison. The fire had been intentionally set with an accelerant, confirming that his death was no accident. What followed was a chilling investigation that revealed a dark truth. Police discovered that Josh's wife had been in regular contact with Eugene Claypool, a convicted murderer serving a life sentence at the Jefferson City Correctional Center. A nurse at the prison, she'd been secretly communicating with Claypool, telling him about her desire to be with him. Their phone calls were recorded, and in them, Amy spoke openly about wanting to be free of her husband. She even told Claypool that they could get married after Josh was out of the picture. This shocking information led to Amy's arrest 3 months after his death. As the case moved forward, Amy's defense team argued that Josh might have taken his own life by drinking the antifreeze, but the judge dismissed that theory. Fast forward 6 years, and on June 25, 2025, Amy entered an Alford plea, a legal move that let her maintain her innocence but acknowledged the prosecution had enough evidence to convict. In return, the prosecution dropped the charge of armed criminal action. Amy was sentenced to 12 years for second-degree murder, 7 years for arson, and 4 years for tampering with evidence. The sentences will run concurrently, meaning she'll serve a maximum of 12 years in prison. While Amy's sentence might seem light, the pain of losing Josh is anything but. His family, his father James, his sister Jennifer, his son Braden, and the rest of his loved ones are left to cope with the loss of a good, faithful husband and father. The long wait for justice has been a tough journey for Josh's family, but through it all, they've remained strong. While his tragic death is an incredibly painful chapter in their lives, it doesn't define who Josh was or the love he left behind. Laura Sardinha was born on September 26, 1994, and by 2020, at just 25 years old, she was working hard to turn her life around in Santa Ana, California. After a tough past, she was determined to create a better future. She was going for an online psychology degree, hoping to get a fresh start. Even though a 2019 motorcycle accident had left her with some pretty serious physical limitations, including losing fine motor skills that made simple tasks like chopping lemons nearly impossible, she wasn't letting it stop her. She even got a $750,000 settlement from the accident. And what did she do with it? She gave $100,000 of it to her abusive boyfriend, Craig Sharon, hoping he'd just disappear. But that's not how it went. Laura tried breaking up with Craig more times than anyone could count. She even recorded desperate pleas, begging him to leave her alone. But Craig, he refused to let go. On the afternoon of September 2, 2020, while talking three-way on the phone to her mom and best friend, Laura was blindsided when Craig showed up in her apartment. Earlier that day, Laura had recorded a desperate message for him, begging him to leave her alone and get away. But once again, he ignored her. As she was talking to her mother and friend, Laura's voice shook with fear. "Craig's here," she said, and then silence. The call cut out. Her friend, knowing something was terribly wrong, immediately called 911. Before they could get there, Laura left one last voicemail, frantically warning that Craig was going to kill her, begging him to get away. But when the police arrived, it was too late. Laura had been stabbed twice in the chest and brutally struck in the head so hard that the knife bent. Craig was found there too, injured with wounds to his chest and neck. His story? He said he simply walked in through an unlocked door, but investigators suspected those injuries were self-inflicted, staged to make it look like Laura had attacked him first. At trial, his defense was all over the place. He claimed he acted in self-defense after Laura attacked him with a knife, but the evidence didn't match up. 3 of his ex-girlfriends testified that they'd had to take out restraining orders against him because he was abusive. And then there was the big issue. Craig, standing at 6 feet tall and weighing 220 pounds, nearly a foot taller and over 100 pounds heavier than Laura, claimed he was in a life-or-death struggle. The prosecutor reminded the jury of Laura's physical condition, which made it nearly impossible for her to defend herself against someone like Craig. Craig, a former Air Force veteran, took the stand in his defense, but couldn't remember the details of the confrontation. The one thing that couldn't be denied, though, was the voicemail. Laura's final cry for help, which rang out in the courtroom. The jury didn't take long to deliberate. After less than a day, they came back with a guilty verdict. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Laura's death was a senseless tragedy. She did everything she could to escape Craig's grip, changing the locks, filing a restraining order, trying to cut ties. But no matter what she did, he kept finding a way back into her life. Melody Victoria Bennett, known as Tori to those who loved her, was born on January 24, 1985. At 33 years old, she was a vibrant, warm woman living in Bushnell, Florida. Tori had a reputation as a kind soul, someone who gave freely to others. Her life, full of potential and kindness, was tragically cut short in a way no one could have predicted. On January 25, 2018, Tori's brother, concerned after not hearing from her for several days, went to check on her. Inside her home, he discovered her lifeless body in the living room. What followed was nothing short of chilling. Sumter County Sheriff's deputies determined that Tori had died from multiple stab wounds. The crime scene suggested a violent, brutal attack, with defensive wounds on her hands, indicating she fought for her life. It was clear this was no accident. It was murder. The medical examiner confirmed she had likely died between the night of January 21st and 22nd, just days before her 33rd birthday. As investigators canvassed the neighborhood, they spoke with 16-year-old Tyler Ryan Hirsch, who lived nearby. Hirsch told authorities that Tori was a family friend, someone he knew well, and denied knowing anything about the crime. But soon, things began to unravel. The bus driver who picked Hirsch up that morning overheard him talking about a woman who had been stabbed to death. The problem? At that point, law enforcement hadn't released any details about the crime. How could he know? That was just the first red flag. At school, Hirsch's story didn't add up. His teacher reported that on January 22nd, Hirsch had asked to go to the school nurse. He had a large cut on his hand, along with several smaller ones. When the nurse asked what happened, Hirsch told her it was personal, refusing to elaborate. The pieces were starting to fall into place. As the investigation deepened, Hirsch's story shifted. Detectives took a DNA sample from him to compare it with evidence from the crime scene. After months of waiting, the DNA came back a match. On January 17, 2019, nearly a year after Tori's death, Tyler Hirsch was arrested. Within a couple of months, he entered an open plea, effectively admitting to his crimes without a formal sentencing agreement. He was convicted of first-degree murder, attempted sexual battery while armed, burglary of a dwelling while armed, and 3 counts of battery on a law enforcement officer. The sentence, life in prison, with no possibility of parole, no second chances. Tori's life was taken by someone she trusted, a neighbor, a family friend. Hirsch's brutal betrayal left her family and the community heartbroken. The cold, calculated nature of the crime, coupled with the eerie nonchalance of the killer, made it even harder to comprehend. Her story, though tragically short, can still inspire us to be vigilant, to care for those around us, and to fight for justice when it's needed most. More than 50 years ago, a young boy's body was found in a Virginia creek. No name, no family. No one came forward to claim him. But now, after all these years, we finally know who he was. His name was Carl Matthew Bryant. He was just 4 years old. It was June 13, 1972, when a teenager discovered Carl's body in Massey Creek, under a bridge on Old Colchester Road in Lorton, Virginia. He'd been beaten to death, blunt force trauma, a homicide. But no one had reported a child missing. No one was searching for him. A local church group stepped in to arrange his burial at Coleman Cemetery in Alexandria and gave him a name, just so he wouldn't be buried as a nobody. And then the case went cold. For over 50 years, he remained a mystery. Sometimes called John Lorton Doe, other times John Fairfax Doe. All investigators had were a few strands of hair collected during the autopsy. They held on to them, hoping one day the science would catch up. In 2003, a computer-generated sketch of the boy was released by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It generated more leads than any Virginia case in their history, but every single one came up empty. The next year, detectives extracted mitochondrial DNA from the boy's hair and entered it into the national database. Still, no matches. In 2014, they tried to exhume the body to test for nuclear DNA, but his tombstone had been washed away by a storm. The exact burial plot was lost. Their only remaining hope was the hair. Then in 2023, Fairfax detectives partnered with Astria Forensics, a lab capable of extracting DNA from the tiniest fragments. Usually, they need 2 centimeters of hair, but Fairfax sent in just a few millimeters, barely anything. And against the odds, it worked. Astria developed a genetic profile that pointed to a family in Philadelphia. Investigators followed the trail to a woman named Vera Bryant, who had 2 sons, Carl, born in 1968, and James, born in 1972. According to family, Vera had left Philadelphia in June 1972 with her boyfriend, James Hedgepeth, and her 2 boys. They said they were heading to Virginia to visit family, but when Vera and Hedgepeth arrived, the children weren't with them. And when Vera returned to Philadelphia, she told her family the boys had stayed behind with Hedgepeth's relatives. That was the last time anyone ever saw Carl or James. No missing persons report was ever filed. No one outside the family knew they were gone. In July 2024, Vera's body was exhumed. DNA confirmed she was Carl's mother. Police now believe that Vera and Hedgepeth, who was not the boy's father, were responsible for Carl's murder, and likely for baby James's disappearance too. Detectives suspect the children were killed somewhere along the route from Philadelphia to Middlesex County, Virginia. Vera died in 1980. Her cause of death is unclear, but her manner of death was ruled a homicide. As for Hedgepeth, he had a violent history, including a 1962 murder conviction. He, too, is now deceased. Detectives believe 6-month-old James Bryant was likely killed around the same time as Carl and possibly discarded along the same route. But they haven't ruled out other possibilities. James could have been abandoned or even handed off to someone else. A baby that young wouldn't have memories, wouldn't be able to speak for himself. That's what makes it harder and even more heartbreaking. In interviews, Vera's former co-workers described her as soft-spoken and kind. She worked as a nursing assistant at a care home in Philadelphia, but she never talked about her boyfriend, never mentioned her children. When detectives came asking questions after her death, no one at work knew a thing. There are no known photos of Carl or James. The only image we have is a forensic reconstruction of Carl's face, created long before we even knew his name. Now we do. A child murdered and discarded under a bridge, now remembered, now named. Detectives are planning to place a memorial bench near the area where he was buried, since the exact gravesite was lost years ago. But the mystery isn't entirely over. There's still one more child missing, James Bryant, just 6 months old at the time. He's presumed dead, but his body has never been found. Fairfax police are asking the public for help. If you knew Vera Bryant or James Hedgepeth, or if you remember anything strange along the route between Philadelphia and Virginia in June of 1972, please come forward. Even the smallest detail might help. Fairfax County Police Chief Kevin Davis said it best. Maybe somebody witnessed something that day. Maybe Vera or James confided in someone before they died. Or maybe a 6-month-old's remains were found in another jurisdiction, and no one ever knew how to tie it back to this case. If you know anything at all, please contact the Fairfax County Police Department's Cold Case Squad. And if you suspect child abuse today, please don't wait. Call the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4A-CHILD. That's 1-800-422-4453. or visit childhelp.org. Every call is free and confidential.